Professor Jo Mackiewicz of Iowa State in the English department. And you're like, what? Professor Jo is actually also a welder.
Women are more likely to stay in a trade if they, number one, have other women around them, but number two, if they have support. Communication obviously plays a huge part in that. How do we mentor each other? How do we show support? There are people who just don't get all of that kind of garage background growing up. And I found out from women that I talked to that that's really common.
Built by sheet metal fabricators for sheet metal fabricators, Paperless Parts is the industry's #1 quoting and collaboration software, helping more than 700 shops across North America simplify every step of the quoting process in a secure, centralized environment. With patented technology, its automated costing and pricing logic is tailored specifically to your shop. By streamlining your workflow, Paperless Parts saves time, boosts profitability, and helps deliver an unbeatable customer experience. Visit paperlessparts.com to learn more.
Hello, welcome to the Fabricator Podcast. I'm Dan Davis of the Fabricator Magazine. Joining me today is Rafael Guerrero of the Welder Magazine.
Good to be back. What month is this? Make sure.
That time is relative on the podcast, Rafael.
Okay.
There really is no reference.
Different.
For us.
It's different in the room. Huh?
We're the past, we're the future, we're the present.
For the dozens of people listening, it's February.
We apologize. Rafael was just awakened from his cryo sleep.
Yes. They keep me up in the back somewhere.
we put him away for a month and wake him up for a month. That's why he looks so youthful. He's actually 60. Today's episode is with Professor Jo Mackiewicz of Iowa State in the English department. And you're like, what? Professor Jo is actually also a welder. She still currently spends some time at Howe's Welding in Ames, or near Ames, Iowa, where Iowa State is. She's done some research related to communication, and she's actually expanded that to include industrial communication. And she went viral when she wrote a piece for the Conversation, in which she described her tenure working for the weld shop and what she ran into as part of her experience there. And we invited her, talked about that, and also kind of talked about her research, and it was a pretty interesting conversation.
But afterwards, she said that she has plans to kind of operate her own shop and put in a ventilation system in her garage. And so she's going all in on this.
She's actually, she's doing it backwards. Wow. Instead of beginning her career in a garage shop, she's actually going to wind it up in a garage shop. So, I think people will be able to kind of appreciate what she brings in terms of, looking at the trades as something that needs to be understood. We kind of closed the conversation with this disconnect that exists between folks and I'll just call it the white-collar world. And, people just don't have any idea how things are made, repaired, and here she gets to kind of experience it firsthand. So,
fixing fry baskets.
Yeah.
Which excited Dan.
Which I actually cited as the Lord's work. I love fried food.
It snowballed into you wanting to make your own taco stand, those metal taco stands that have
I think it's that time of year where
right?
when winter hits, I just start thinking about more foods to sustain me through the cold months. All right, so enough about me droning on about food. I enjoy this more intelligent conversation with an academic professional who has a talent for welding. Thank you.
It's that time of year again. Time for all students pursuing a manufacturing-related degree in a 2- or 4-year program to apply for a scholarship from FMA's foundation, SparkForce. Eligible students can receive up to $3,500 per year for their program. Applications for fall 2025 are being accepted until March 31st. Get all the details and apply today at fmamfg.org. Join FMA in Louisville, Kentucky for the Coil Processing Workshop on March 25th and 26th. This 2-day event is your chance to connect with industry professionals, Tackle your biggest processing challenges and gain valuable insights. In a small group setting, you'll explore facility tours, watch equipment in action, and uncover innovative solutions for cutting, slitting, leveling, safety, and more. Don't miss this opportunity to advance your skills and strengthen your network. Learn more and register today at fmamfg.org. And now, back to the episode.
Before you're starting to ask yourself, why is an English teacher here on the Fabricator Podcast? She actually fabricates, which is probably one of the main criteria we ask for our guests.
But not for our hosts.
You know, we can get to that later.
Yeah,
right? They just upgraded the community college fab lab near my house, and now I'm like thinking I need some taco holders.
There you go.
Nice.
So never say never. May I call you Joe instead of Professor?
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody calls me that.
I really am fond of the title Professor. I don't know why. Can you explain to our audience a little bit about your background, your expertise at Iowa State, and maybe how that kind of went down the path you took to learn to weld?
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. I got my PhD in applied linguistics 20 plus years ago, and I was always very interested in language. So I went into how people write, how people communicate, and a lot of that time was spent looking at learning interactions or interactions between tutors or teachers and students, and how learning takes place through language. So I was studying how writing tutors and writing students talk and how that manifests in students' writing. Later on, that transitioned, and I started looking at how welding teachers and welding students communicate, and then how that scaffolds students' learning, how they become better welders and better fabricators. And that transition occurred around 2018 when I started to take welding classes myself at a community college in Des Moines.
Yeah. So what spurred that interest in welding, wanting to do something with your hands?
Well, there's a few things. The first one was that I had injured myself and I couldn't do the things that I like to do, like the physical things, like ride my bike or just all the things you normally do to like stay in shape. So I thought to myself, if I'm not going to go completely crazy, I need to find something that I can do with my body that's not going to like exacerbate these problems I'm having. So I started to take the welding classes. The other thing is that my grandfather was a welder, so I'd kind of heard stories from my dad and my uncle about the work that he did back in World War II in my hometown, which is Superior, Wisconsin, where they build ships. So I kind of had that idea in mind too when I was trying to figure out what's something else I can do with my time, learn something else while I'm going through this difficult time of like waiting for a surgery and recuperating. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the reasons you're here and we became aware of you is you actually wrote this piece that was, I don't know what going viral entails nowadays, but at least it caught my eye. And I think it caught other people's eyes because I've seen it picked up elsewhere. And it was talking about your experience, even while you were taking the welding classes, but eventually you went on to work for a welding shop near Ames.
Yeah.
And I forget the title of the article. It wasn't this paraphrasing, but my experience as a welder
Pretty
as
much.
a woman or
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It was a long title.
Yeah.
They like to get in like a lot of some sort of facts and hooks.
Yeah,
Get
never.
people to
Yeah,
look.
yeah. Creativity
Right.
is always stifled by SEO. So.
Yeah. Well, I was really grateful to the editors there because we went through a lot of, it was an article in The Conversation, which is a place where a lot of academics publish their work in a more sort of everyday language. So I worked on the idea of what might be of interest to readers. And one of the things that the editors at The Conversation said was, well, maybe if you could talk a little bit about your experience as a woman in a weld shop. So that's why I pitched that, even though the book that it's based on, really only one chapter sort of deals with that. But it's something I think that's interesting, especially as more women go into welding and other skilled trades. So I think that's why they were so interested in that angle.
So you went to work for Howe.
Howe's Welding and Ames. Yeah, Jim Howe.
You did work. I mean, it's not just the grunt work, which you started off with, but you eventually went on to do a lot. You supplied us with a chapter from your book, and I think there was a description of you having to create these like a book bracket
bookends?
with
You're right.
out of like railroad
Railroad
and
ties.
like it was really
Yeah.
like you got I think you got like one chance to see how it was done.
Yeah.
After that, you're on your own,
Yeah.
which pretty much describes life in a fab shop, I think.
It really does. Yeah. I mean, I was so lucky that I landed at Howe's Welding. I landed there because after that book about communication between welding teachers and welding students, I wanted to do another book. And I thought it was going to be about how people learn to read and use technical drawings. And I was also, being a writing teacher and professor, I wanted to study the genres, the types of documents that are in different workspaces, trades workspaces. So the first place that I visited was Howe's. And I saw projects like that going on, even though at first I wasn't doing them, but I saw neat things like this client who has these railroad ties and wants them put together, and I had to learn how to do that. But after working at Howe's and visiting these other fab sites, that's when I decided maybe the book would be a little bit broader and be more about learning a skilled trade in the workplace, as opposed to like in a trade school, like where I'd been before. And that's how all these really super cool projects popped up. Is I just started working for Howe after I had, been visiting him for a few months in 2022. And when I got my welding diploma in May 2022, I asked him if he would hire me, and he said yes. And so ever since then, I've been working part-time, just hours. I'm not busy with the university job or on the weekends. I just spend all my extra time working for Jim.
Yeah. And how do you juggle the two jobs as, part-time there at the shop and then also at the university?
It's a lot, but it's both a blessing and a curse, I guess. But I live about 5.5, 6 hours from my husband and my dog and my house in Foxborough, Wisconsin. So I have a lot of extra hours when I'm not with those guys to do extra, to have an extra job. So all my extra hours when I'm just in Ames by myself, I just spend doing the job I really love.
Well, I mean, fabricating is the one thing that sometimes people take home with them because the number of people that like to kind of work on their own and have their own smaller shop in a garage, it kind of makes sense.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about Howe's, that I saw advantages and disadvantages when I was doing this research and looking at these 10 different fabrication sites, anywhere as big as like Vermeer and John Deere to as small as Jim's Howe's shop, but also other small shops like Custom Steel in Ames. There's about 4 full-time people there. So I kind of got to see a whole spectrum of fabrication and welding in the study. And I realized at a place like Howe's, you can do so many different processes, so many different projects in just like a couple of days or a couple of weeks. I mean, for example, over the last 2 weeks, I've finished a project TIG welding aluminum boxes. I TIG welded chromoly tubes for soil samples. I TIG welded cast aluminum steps for a truck, I think it was for. I stick welded signs for a park in Ames. I MIG welded little pieces into exhaust pipes. So that's just 3 processes right there: TIG, MIG, and stick, and all sorts of different projects. So every day is different. That's what I like about it.
Yeah. So you mentioned that in your book that as part of the research you were going out to speak with these giant companies, and not even giant, multinational in the case of Deere and Vermeer, smaller scale but large as well. with that type of background, how do you kind of describe Howe as being a good place to be? Do you think, like, if you had chose that as a career, that's a great place to get experience?
At Howe's?
Yeah, that type of small where everybody's kind of doing everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's got its drawbacks and its benefits. I like it because every day is different. But as I talk about in the book, it can be difficult because you might learn something or get a little bit of deliberative practice. That's a term I use in the book a lot, but it's where you're like concentrating and analyzing the work that you're doing rather than just doing mindless repetitions. There's a lot of like research on exercise and coaching about deliberative practice, like tennis players and things like that, or violin players too in music. So I think it can be challenging in that you might get some practice in doing something, learn how to do something from a more expert person like Jim, but then you might not encounter it again for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So you don't get the same sort of reinforcement. And I use like the example of the lathe in the shop. You know, Jim shows me how to do something. I think I got it down. I think I understand. And then maybe a month goes by, I try to do it again. I'm like, what was I doing? So that's the challenge, I think, of working in a small shop that's where the work is so diverse. In a bigger shop, the tasks might be more limited. Maybe you're just doing like pulse spray transfer MIG or something like that. And you might be working on the same sort of sub-assemblies or components a lot. So I think you can become an expert in what you're doing in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah. I'm working on a story now where the point was made that learning in school is great, but then you get to the job and you're like,
Yeah.
Different.
what is this? And it's really something you can't teach just based on the amount of like type of work that comes in. And the one thing I remember in that chapter you provided us was once again to go back to that railroad piece, and it has to be preheated
Yeah.
for you to work on it to avoid, I think, cracking. And, the question you have is like, oh, how hot? And you're like, well, hot enough.
That's what Jim said.
So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that kind of describes people that come to a job with some experience, whether on their own or maybe some previous work experience, as opposed to somebody who is totally just green in terms of
Yeah.
life experiences with welding and just the educational part of it. So it's interesting that you brought up kind of the I assume being able to do everything early on might be the best way, but sometimes maybe people just need that type of like rote.
Yeah, more deliberative practice, more reinforcement of one type of thing that you're doing. There's definite benefits to that. I talk about expertises in the book because I think that there is like, you can talk about depth and then at Howe's breadth of expertise. And it takes years to accomplish that because you simply have to have that deliberative practice and scaffolded learning from some expert person who's showing you how to do it and correcting your errors and helping you pay attention to angle or speed or all the different components of laying down a good weld. And because there's so much to do at a place like Howe's, that repetition or that practice is going to come over many months and many years, just because all of those different subject matter domains, all those different subjects are spread out so much.
How open were people willing to talk with you? Because the excerpt that you shared with us, you mentioned some people were willing to give their names, others you use pseudonyms. So
I made it so that everybody is anonymous in the book. Like I don't use anyone's real names except for my coworkers because they were all like, I don't care.
Right.
Nobody really cared. But yeah. But even so, even with that, yeah, there are, of course, people who don't really want to talk about what they're doing or they just don't feel comfortable with it. So, yeah, that can be a bit of a challenge. I'd encountered that before on previous research, when some people just don't like being in front of a microphone or want somebody with a recorder in their face. So it is a challenge when you're doing sort of interview research to get somebody to talk. But there were enough. It was really interesting to talk to some of those folks about and try to understand their learning experience. And I think it's hard to articulate exactly how you learn. I asked people about, how did you learn to read technical drawings or, how do you teach it to other people? And, it's normal. People don't really reflect on those things all that much unless it's their job to do that. So I just asked a lot of people, I
Yeah.
guess, to finally
Okay.
get answers, to get enough people to actually like fill out a chapter. Yeah.
How did you find, what was your mindset in the early days you're working in the fab shop? Was it kind of, oh my God, I got to go to work? Or did you actually kind of embrace the challenge?
Well, when I first started, I thought, okay, it's going to be about technical drawings and genres. So that I was really focused on that. I came to Jim's shop, like taking pictures of documents. Like I thought that's what the whole book was going to be about. What kinds of genres appear in skilled trade workplaces. And I still think that's super interesting because all of the writing research is really about like professional writing and like by engineers or business people. And not enough is said about like non-conforming parts tags or,
Yeah.
Invoices. So I thought, what if we take these genres that appear in skilled trade workplaces and incorporate them into the writing classes that these students take in their community college courses or their tech college courses? Instead of making writing boring for them, what if they're actually using the genres and make it more interesting, right? So that's what I was really focused on when I started. But soon after, when I was getting my introduction to Jim's shop and I saw all the machining as well as the welding that was going on, it started to dawn on me just how ignorant I was about what the world of welding was. It was like you were saying about, you go to school and that's only a small part of your education. In welding school, we welded coupons. And I mean, I get it. You just need to
Yeah.
learn the basics of a weld. That's what you've got to do. But you're doing like, 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch coupons, pieces of metal, different positions. But you're not really fabricating anything. And you're not doing the sort of welding that'll come in, where the other day I was TIG welding fry baskets for the pizza pits.
Here you go.
and
Wait up.
Ames.
God bless you for doing the Lord's work.
Exactly, right? That you don't get fry baskets in welding school. So you've got to sort of figure out like, well, how am I gonna repair this? And of course I have my boss to ask, but it's not the same sort of TIG welding stainless that we did in school at all. First of all, there's the smell of weird fried things coming off of it. So that's one thing. But
That's love.
yeah. So my mindset was like, oh, there's just so much more than I even thought before in all those years of night classes. And that's intimidating. I think it's intimidating, especially for people who don't have a lot of background in machines and tools. And that's highly correlated with women. It's not only women, but there are people who just don't get all of that kind of garage background growing up. So every day I'm asking Jim, like, what is this? What is this? Like, I don't know what the tool is or what its name is. And I found out from women that I talked to that that's really common, that when they even started welding school, they didn't know that this is a grinder. They have to learn that on top of everything else. Yeah. So my mindset was like, I'm a little bit scared, but kind of ready for the challenge.
Yeah. So what we hear from fabricators is that they are more likely nowadays to hire based on attitude as opposed to actual skills. Right attitude, they feel like they can train them. Do you find that is kind of the case with you, that you felt an environment where you could learn and it was conducive to you learning?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, my boss is all about teaching us how to use the machines in the shop, how to do different, welding processes, how to do different positions. He's really great about that. I think I think that's true for me too. You're looking for people who have got the attitude of curiosity and learning, and they don't have a lot of hubris. They don't bring with them this idea that they already know all of this. I mean, I think that's half the battle, is knowing what you don't know. For me, it's evident. And that's actually one thing I like about welding, is the fact that sort of the proof is in the pudding, as they say. I mean, you either do it right or you don't. So it's pretty clear what you know and what you don't. And I think that for me, after like so many years in academia, that was really refreshing.
Right.
There's no faking it. it's either right or it's not. And it can be, I mean, I've made so many mistakes. I have a chapter just on, that's not even all of them, but that's just the ones that came to my mind as I was writing the book. But I try to like figure out like, okay, what are the different types of mistakes that I'm making? And if you can, in the face of all those errors, persevere, I think I would want to work with somebody who's got that idea of, okay, I want to learn more. I'm going to persevere through the mistakes, because it can get a little bit disheartening, when you make a bunch of mistakes. Yeah.
Any, since you bring up the mistakes, any mistakes in particular that stand out to you that you really?
Well, yeah. So I've got this whole chapter that covers mistakes. There are ones that are based on communication, just not having like a conversation about a project that's clear enough at the beginning, and you might, cut something the wrong size. There's errors that come from like just layout. When you're first learning, you've got to figure out how to get your measurements precise. And it's not as easy as it looks, to be honest. When you're off by a 16th, that can really matter. Tolerances matter. So there are mistakes like that. Yeah, I've done a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes. But for me, it's thinking about, okay, what can I learn from this afterwards? Yeah, I guess that's the main trick.
Also, kind of going back to that piece that appeared in the conversation.
Yeah.
It was great to see that the environment you're in was one that was conducive to you kind of, and not only learning, but contributing.
Yeah.
But this outside element of customers coming in, that was just, you don't, and having worked, in enough in my life, the customer's always going to be the pain in the butt.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe you can touch upon that. Like, it seemed to me, and that's where most of the, for lack of a better term, gruff came from.
Yeah. I have been really lucky to work in a place where it's a very welcoming and respectful environment. My bosses, my coworkers have been. I know from talking to other women, tradeswomen, that is not always or even close to the case. They have been through some things that I have not encountered. My main problems have come from customers. Absolutely. Now, that said, 95% of them do not care one way or the other what your gender is. They just want what they want, and they're just getting out of there. But there are, one thing I've noticed is there's a sort of type of customer who wants to show their expertise. So especially, I think, in face of a woman. So for me, it's kind of interesting to watch how those conversations occur and sort of the signaling of expertise. The one I talk about in the book, because it was kind of so stark, was the gentleman who brought up the tape measure and the diamonds on the tape measure. And this is after he had, tried to go on about, other things that he knew.
So he actually had me looking up. I read that thing, and I'm like,
too.
what do the black diamonds mean?
What drove me so crazy is that Jim had told me that probably a year before, what they were for, but I couldn't remember. So I was like,
well, the thing that kind of made me laugh is like, what does carpentry have to do with it?
I know. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to tell. Like, sometimes I feel like I'm being watched if there are like people in the area for what I'm doing. And not that happens that much. We don't have clients in the shop all that much. But when it does happen, I don't know how much of it is in my own head and how much of it is really happening. I think it's happening. I described that one time when I was using the iron worker and punching these holes, and it was kind of challenging because I had to make sure they were square, and I'm just trying to like do my job, not lose my fingers. And I feel like I'm being watched. So that I sometimes feel. That said, that kind of thing will happen, I think, more in a smaller shop than it will in a bigger fabrication site where there's not going to be customers milling about looking at you. On the other hand, I study, or not study, but I talked to women for the book who talked about like the tests that they had to do to get their position, and they had to show or prove to their coworkers that they could do the job. And I didn't that didn't seem right to me. They felt like they had to prove something. So I don't know. I guess there's still these sorts of tensions happening in all sorts of workplaces. For me, I've been really lucky. But yeah, I've run into a couple of real jerks. I mean,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
we'd also, before we started recording, mentioned the internet feedback you had received, and luckily, a minimal amount of jerks online, which to me seems to be the place they congregate the most. So that's a positive. What type of feedback have you gotten from the piece?
Well, the most, I don't know, heartwarming, the best thing for me was hearing from women, especially women who had been welders or fabricators or just skilled tradespeople in the 70s and 80s. And they told me some of their stories. That was incredible. And I've even talked to some of them via Zoom, a few times. That was great. There were other women who just chimed in and are working in trades now and said, "You are spot on. Thanks for writing this." Not that I thought of it as a big anthem or anything
Right,
like
right,
that.
right.
But that was really great. I got some, there were some men who wanted to explain things or just some negative comments. And that was an interesting challenge in trying to respond to them respectfully, but to tell them, here's what I feel about it or here's what I think about it. And I wrote it because I think it's true. And yeah, but for the most part, I got some really positive feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, I get the sense in the industry. I mean, obviously, it's not a formal survey, but most people want to do right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and try to. But sometimes it's hard. And then, look, entering the realm of old people, I have found myself that sometimes it's kind of whether it might be a reference or telling a story, is sometimes it's a generation gap is a real thing.
Yeah.
And did you get a sense that maybe even some comments from people are saying like, "Hey, am I doing the right thing? Can you guide me on this?" And were you able to provide that type of advice maybe to anyone who reached out?
I'm not sure I was giving advice. I was maybe more moral support,
Yeah,
let's hang in together. I don't feel like I've got enough expertise, especially for a woman working in a bigger fabrication site, to do that. I almost feel like, you should go to HR. But yeah, I think we were just sort of like, hey, we're still a small minority of people, and we kind of have to have each other's backs. And one really cool resource I found for that was the subreddit Blue Collar Women. It's just this wonderful group of women who support each other and try to give each other advice, because they've been there. Yeah, so there are more resources for women now for dealing with the problems that I guess probably eventually are going to come up.
Yeah. I know, at least in our industry, there's a group, Women in Manufacturing. It's all levels of people involved.
Yeah.
They have a meeting every Fab Tech. So, I mean, there's certain things out there. As with everything, you don't know what's out there until you start really kind of digging into it.
Yeah. But it was super gratifying to see the comments and it made me think about even the negative ones made me think about, okay, how am I, sort of presenting myself online? What sort of images am I showing of the work I've done? In the book, I hope it's more contextualized, sort of, images of any welds I've done. I've tried to say I was working for about 6 months when I did that. It was the first time I ever, for example, one negative comment I got was about a TIG weld I did on this. It was like a big umbrella for a party, those big party tents.
Yeah.
And I had to weld one of the arms back on. And one of the people who commented said, "That's a really ugly TIG weld, da, da, da." I was like, well, okay, so I've been working for about 6 months. And as I say in the book, it was the first time that I TIG welded standing up because I couldn't reach to get to the arm, to the corner of the umbrella. So, it's more about the learning process. So yeah, it kind of made me reflect on, have I explained that exactly right? Not that I'm trying to excuse my ugly welds, but it's all about how you learn to do it.
We have a friend that sometimes hosts or co-hosts on the program, Josh Welton. He'll be the first one to tell you that people judging internet welds, he sometimes doubts their own expertise. Is the nicest way to put it.
I have no doubt. Yeah.
The only time I'm paying attention is when they're pointing to a weld on a roller coaster. I'm like, I'm not quite sure, but that's definitely not the one where you want the question.
That's a critical one. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Can communication help when it comes to like welcoming a welder into an environment that there may be a little apprehension for whatever reason?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, some of the women at the places I visited talked very much about that, about the role of mentoring. And the research I did for the book showed that to be the case too, that women are more likely to stay in a trade if they, number one, have other women around them, but number two, if they have support, if they know that if something happens in the workplace, that there's the business is going to have their backs. But I think it's going to become better the more women and just other underrepresented groups, not just women, but the more underrepresented groups that are in trades where you don't feel like, as that one book that I cited says, alone in a crowd. Yeah. So if you're not the only one, I think it's a lot easier. And yeah, communication obviously plays a huge part in that. How do we mentor each other? How do we show support? Those are all things that we do when we try to talk about in teaching, but it can also just be from colleagues at work.
When it comes to communication, do you even get to the written part of it? Like work process instructions?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, are you talking about like technical or documentation?
Actually, yeah, because I think that's part of the training when people come in green. They don't even know the basics of like blueprint reading.
Yeah. So one of the chapters I do cover the written genres, and some of that is looking at like process descriptions in some of the different sites that I visited. Absolutely. I talked to some people about who actually do the technical documentation, which was super interesting for me as somebody who teaches technical writing and technical editing. So I was talking to people who actually do that job and how their training is put together. I visited a couple of training programs at bigger sites that can actually afford to have real like apprentice training programs for weeks on end. And I was looking through their training materials. I think there's a lot more work that could be done about that, like how to make materials that are more scaffolded. That's one of the big themes of the book is how do we like take people step by step through a learning process, keeping them just on the cusp of what they know versus what they don't know, so that they're always like striving to learn the next thing, but also having the comfort and the motivation that comes from being able to do things well. So you want to sort of balance that. And I think good training, including good written materials in these trainings, would keep people kind of at that, what's called the zone of proximal development, in that zone where they're constantly moving a little bit forward. A good thought out training program can do that. And in some ways that can be easier than in a place like Howe's, where you're getting it sort of piecemeal, and that's just life. I mean, they can't schedule the projects for your learning, right? So that's one of the challenges of learning in a small place is you've got to try to keep at that cusp in so many different subject areas. But it's possible in a training program where you're training somebody to do more, say, production work, where the sort of breadth or the scope of the work is perhaps smaller.
Is this book catered more toward people in an academic setting or tradespeople or a mix of both or others? I'm
so glad you asked that, because for the first time in my life, I wrote a book that I think is readable by everybody. I really, really tried very hard to write this book and not use a bunch of academies. In other books I've written, they've been scholarly books or monographs, right? And they're all written for an academic audience, which is fine because that's basically anybody who cared about them. But in this case, I thought, there are people who could actually care about my experience that aren't in academia. They might actually, like somebody learning a trade might actually want to learn about my experience. And maybe it would help them, too, to understand their own learning and not feel bad when they fail at something or they do one of those mistakes. So anything, first of all, there's a glossary. But the glossary I found was really for like welding and fabrication terms. It wasn't for like academic concepts. Anything that's sort of an academic concept like zone of proximal development or deliberative practice, I think I do. I explain it and define it and explain it in the book. So I tried to use good practices from technical writing and technical editing in writing this book. I try to explain everything. And it's also different in that it's basically my experience. So it's written from a first-person perspective. I draw on research, but I don't linger on it. I use a lot of examples. So my parents have read it. My parents aren't academics. And my mom told me they followed along just fine. So that makes me feel good. I've had some other friends read it. So I feel good that it's a readable book.
And just for your academic friends, expertly cited.
Expertly cited. Yeah. But even that, I tried to do it in a way before, I'm sort of a citation geek, I know all the different styles, but I used a style like with footnotes so that a person wouldn't have to read over like long citations in the middle of a sentence, like Smith and Wesson, 1999.
Yeah, okay. Right.
So there's none of that. There's just a little number with the citation.
On the same page.
So people can find it,
Yep.
but it's not interrupting the reading.
Right.
That was my goal, just to make it nice and readable.
Yeah. So do you include I don't want to call it covers, but do you reflect back on your training, not just at Howe, but like your educational part of it as well?
I do. Yeah, a little bit. I talk a little bit about how we were taught in my program and what I saw when I published that other book that was on communication between welding teachers and students. I went to 3 different welding schools, so I sort of saw, or I didn't go there, but I studied them.
Right.
I went and visited them. So I saw what was common across, these different programs. So I do talk a little bit about that. One way I do that is, or probably the most stark example, is to talk about the sort of teaching that went on in regard to like technical drawings in my program, which I found was, I don't want to pick on a teacher. I'm a teacher myself, but it was really bad as far as like how you teach students to read technical drawings. So I reflect back on that and what I thought was so wrong about it and why I didn't really learn from that experience in order to like delve into the research or to consider what are the challenges of learning to make 3 dimensions in your brain from a 2-dimensional
Right.
drawing, and how can we get people to understand that? And then I started looking at, okay, how have other teachers did this? My teacher wasn't great. In fact, he was plain bad. But other teachers are doing this with some really cool methods, like using square blocks and having people draw a 2D view of a 3D object through glass or through a globe or something like that. So other little tricks that people did to try to get the brain to see in 3 dimensions or to be able to create 2 dimensions from a 3D object. There are ways to teach those things, and they're based much like learning how to use a lathe on the scaffolding process of stepwise getting students to do and read more complicated drawings. So that's one way I drew on my experience, was to reflect on a sort of less than positive experience.
Yeah. What's it like for an academic to go into like a much more hands-on type learning experience? Is that something you had done before, or even in high school? Did you participate in woodworking? Or?
Yeah, maybe I took shop in like the 7th grade. I don't know.
Well, that sounds like a very Midwestern thing. Yeah.
But it was. There's a book by Matthew Crawford called Shop Class as Soulcraft that was published, I don't know, probably about 15 or so years ago now. And he talks a lot more philosophically about the value of doing something with your hands. And I find that's really true. I think a lot of us do that. In academia, people talk about procrastination, where they're trying to write something, but instead of doing it, they'll like clean their bathroom. And I think what they're trying to get out of that is the beauty of seeing something done, like something that's tangible, where you can see the difference. And in a lot of academic work, that that doesn't happen on a daily basis. Even when you see a book published, I mean, you feel proud, but it's like it's in the past. You move on, you move past it. You can't ever just say like, wow, I made this thing. And I find in fabrication and welding, you get to do that every single day. It's super gratifying, in more so than cleaning a bathroom, I think. Although, you take what you can get. But no, for me, like making the signs or welding the fry baskets, that is then I go to my university job and I'm like, oh, well, I don't think I'm going to get that again. It's like, it's gratifying in a different way, but it's for me that seeing something in my hand after it's done, that is everything. I love it.
Did you or have you considered taking any other or learning any other skilled trades?
Well, at the shop, I'm learning some machining. It all happens though, like at project by project. If the project calls for it, then I'll get to use like the lathe. I've made quite a few spikes on the lathe. You can do way more complicated things on a lathe. So I'm learning, how to use a mill. I've learned, how to use the drill press. And so things that I never got to do in the welding program, I've learned a little bit at Howe's. So I call myself like maybe a novice to advanced beginner in some of these other machining skills. And but now, absolutely. I'm totally open to learning all sorts of different things. I want to practice my brazing. I haven't done that for a long time, but we get a lot of broken cast parts in the shop. And, I want to be able to help Jim by doing that. And so there's just always, something more to learn. I bought a welding machine last summer before last, and it's got a pulse feature. So now I'm thinking like, oh, I wonder how you use that. So even just like the technology kind of leads to learning new things. Yeah, there's just a whole world of things to learn.
Yeah. You used the phrase earlier, expertise. And one of the things I find funny is that, especially in the field of fabricating, if I were to go to anybody who might own a shop or have been doing something for a while, and call them an expert, in most instances they might take that, they're a little too humble to accept that adjective. So I guess what I'm asking you is, in your short kind of experience with fabricating, how much time is needed before one achieves like a level of expertise in your mind?
I really grappled with that. I tried to think, should I actually say how long?
Well, I think that's one of the good things about the book, though, is that you do cite a lot of stuff in terms of other research. Yeah. But at the same time, you're posing these questions. Yeah. And there's really not a hard, definitive answer to it.
There's not. There was Malcolm Gladwell's book got a lot of buzz, and he talked about 10,000 hours of practice, right? And so I talked about research that kind of debunked that idea and how that number kind of got out there. And even the person who first mentioned that number was like, that's not what I meant. Yeah. So I think that in a place like Howe's, where there is depth and breadth, it depends on what you're talking about. Are you talking about expertise in all of it, in all the breadth? I think that takes a long time. To get expertise in one single domain or subject matter, I guess less time of real focused practice study of it. And I think that some other jobs are maybe better for that, because you're doing a more limited set of, or you're performing a more limited set of actions. So I think working with someone like Jim, who's got 50 plus years across all of these different subject domains, it's intimidating, because you see it's probably impossible to gain those expertises across all that breadth. But in another way, it's sort of a challenge, and it's fun that that all of those different skills or knowledges are out there. So I don't know how long it takes. I mean, if you were to do the math, I imagine it takes years. It's got to be way more decades.
You could either that or measure the reject pile.
Yeah. And just you think about all of the different, experiences that you have to see, what the puddle does in this situation or in this sort of an angle, or, how many times you have to weld underneath a trailer to figure out how to best do it and to keep yourself from being burnt up. It takes a lot of that deliberative practice, a lot of repetitions. I think it has to take years. Yeah.
Were you trained using auto darkening helmets or like old school flip top?
My boss, Jim, he uses old school. We were just having this conversation because I bought a new welding helmet and it's got a nice big window where you can see real colors. It's not just green. And I was like, it's so wonderful. And he uses the old school one. But the problem with the old school one in my mind is that, I was trained on auto darkening helmets, is that you have to like kind of know where your electrode is when you start. And for me, I like to be able to see it when you can't do that when it's dark.
Yeah.
You're kind of blind for a minute. So not a minute, but a second.
It's amazing. Yeah, like we took a training class and they had us wear the flip top, and I was just amazed that people could actually keep their hands in the same place.
Yeah.
I mean, like somebody can't walk and chew gum at the same time. It's a challenge.
I can't do it. I mean, I don't know how much of welding is like innate versus
I
practice.
think some people have a talent for it.
I think some people do have a talent for it. Yeah, it's like learning languages, right? I mean, some people just get it, and other people are like me. I've been studying French for 8 years, and I'm barely reaching advanced level now. So, I think some people do just for whatever reason they maybe their hands are less shaky or something like that. But it's more than that too. So yeah, I don't know. I think that I don't know if I have an innate talent for it. I don't think I do. Like I talk about this a little bit in the book too, because there's always this comment about, women make better welders. People sometimes say this to women who are welding. And I found this article written by a woman, I think it might have been in the Welder actually, who said, practice and makes better welders. It's not like being a man or a woman or anything else. In any case, I'm not sure that I have this innate talent, but I think there are people who come to it more readily.
You brought up the shop you work at now. Just tell me a little bit about Jim's shop.
It's a small shop. So unlike other shops, we do repair. So it's repair and fabrication. And that brings in the diversity of the projects for sure. It's a small shop. There's part-timers like me, maybe 3 or so. And then there's a couple, it depends on the month, but there's 1 or 2 full-timers. So really small, really diverse place. A lot in Iowa, we have a lot of farmers in the area, so a lot of the projects relate to like farm equipment, but there's also a university where Iowa State where I'm at, so there's sort of projects for research too, like fabricating components for research projects. So it's just incredibly diverse, and that's there are smaller shops like Howe's, but I think they tend to do more fabrication work. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, more production work.
Yeah. What's been some of your favorite projects?
Oh, hard to say. But for me, I love anything TIGging aluminum, but I also like stainless. So I just finished, I think I mentioned making these boxes. It was for soil research, I think. And there was C-channel around the edge, a sort of frame of C-channel, and then 4 sides of aluminum. I had to make 10 of them. So I know I could really see the deliberative practice at work when I finally got to make 10 of something rather than just making 1 of something. And I was like, by the end, my welds were more consistent. I don't think I'm quite laying dimes yet on my aluminum, but it looked a lot better. My corners got better. They were, flatter. And so that was a really cool project. One of the other ones I liked, it wasn't outside of TIG and outside of aluminum, was I made 3 signs for parks in Aden Park in Ames. And that's really cool when you can see something you built like out in the world and people are walking by it.
Have you had the chance to show some of your colleagues that, hey, I did that?
Well, they've seen the article now, and I became like, I was a little bit of a rock star for a couple of days. That was pretty cool. I think maybe everybody, I'm not sure, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think everybody's got that sort of want to do something that's tangible and to leave a mark on the world somehow. I mean, not just welding, but it could be anything. So I think like making the signs for the park, that kind of scratched that itch for me because I'm like, it's going to be there a long time and people are going to walk by it. So I guess I got a little bit of that sense that people who are in construction, when they've built something and they can look at that like, forever and say like, oh yeah, I built that skyscraper, or I did that bridge, there's a sort of a pride that comes with that.
Do you think this whole thing has made you a more well-rounded individual?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I think that I work with a sort of diverse set of people. I go from one job to another, and I kind of, speaking two languages every day. When I go from one job, I kind of talk about those things. I go to the other job, and it's all about, 1/8 inch square tubing.
Right.
So it's, yeah, I guess in that sense, I've become a little bit more well-rounded in that I've got another domain of, I mean, not expertise yet, but of growing competence. And yeah, it kind of fulfills something in me to make a mark on the world, or to be useful in a way that I think my academic work didn't always meet for me. Like I mentioned that, you publish a book and it's like it's done and you're already moving on. You're doing something else. But with like the signs in Ada Hayden Park, they're just always there,
Right.
reminding me that I did it. So I feel, I think weirdly, more pride for my signs in the park than
Yeah.
I do for the books. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the reason I asked that is I think sometimes this industry in particular, and manufacturing in general, as it was kind of de-emphasized during the 80s and 90s, is that people just have a disconnect about how things are done, how food is grown, how
100%.
things get repaired.
Yeah.
And it's you're kind of, at least the association's kind of working to kind of build up that, I don't want to call it familiarity, but at least give people an idea of what's available in terms of a career.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to me that sort of disconnect between the things that are made. You can kind of see people, or at least some people, being drawn more back to hands-on skills, like in craft breweries or ciders, or, more like maker spaces in cities. I come from near Duluth, Minnesota, where there's a whole maker space where people are sewing and glass blowing and welding and doing all sorts of things. So people want to be able to do that. I think maybe they haven't figured out exactly how or what their thing is yet. They don't know. But I think people want that. But I do think, yeah, in a lot of cases, there is a sort of disconnect. I mean, we have people come into the shop who want something that was cheaply made, some piece of crap. Can I say crap? From, and they want it fixed. Well, the time it takes to fix something that's super thin metal, cheaply made, usually painted, or the time you get the paint off, and you've got to be really careful about thin metal. So things that are cheaply made, that you almost want to say, you're better off just buying another
Right.
one.
I mean, it's indicative of an entire generation. Yeah.
Of a throwaway sort of thing. I mean, it's sort of a tension, right? Like it's probably easier just to buy a new one. It's cheaper because if I actually charged you for the time it would take me to fix this, it would cost 3 times as much as it did to buy it. Yet on the other hand, I don't want to be contributing to more stuff in a landfill either, more cheap crap strewn about the globe. So I don't really have a good answer, but I kind of answer or grapple with that in the book. Like we see it all the time. People who come in with the stuff that they want fixed and they don't know. That's the disconnect. They don't know what is involved. It's not just like, you can't just take a MIG gun and like weld it. Yeah, it's a little harder than that.
I think the world would be a little bit better if everybody had to take shop class.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Teach people how to make it instead of having other people fix it.
Or maybe fix it themselves, little classes. So, I mean, the good news is that the more of these maker spaces are popping up. So I think more people are learning or want to learn skills. You see people who want to learn a little bit about, fixing their own cars, or I mean, unfortunately, now I think it's harder to fix a car.
Right.
But I mean, the thought is there at least, or and people who do, or sewing clothes or whatever the case may be. I think it's sort of innate in us to want to embody something in the world.
What's the latest on your book? When will it be available? I
uploaded all the files and went through all the permissions, and I think it's going to be available in early 2025 from Springer. I wanted Springer as the publisher because they do work. They've published other books on learning in a workplace. And I was really happy they took my book, my idea. It's going to be published open access. I got a grant from the vice president for research at Iowa State to...
Congratulations.
Thank you. That was pretty cool. So it's going to be available for free online. And then I think the print copies are going to be way cheaper than they otherwise would have been. But yeah, free. So I hope sometime in the beginning of 2025.
Do you have any other book ideas for the near or far future?
I've been thinking about that, what I might like to do. I might like to delve further into the documents as I thought I was going to do, but only did 2 chapters on. I think there's more to say about how we might use these sort of skilled trade genres to teach writing. So get back to like the idea of how do we learn and teach writing. Another idea I had would be to to just talk to more women or other underrepresented groups in trades, not just welding and fabrication, but other ones too, to kind of find out more about their experience and maybe to talk a little bit more about the role of communication, look at mentoring. So sort of along the lines of what we were talking about earlier, but that idea is a little bit inchoate in my brain. I'm not really sure yet, but yeah, I know I want to keep my research focused on trades in some way, shape, or form, how that melds with like my past research on writing and how people learn to write or and communication in learning, how it jibes with that, I'm not sure yet.
Being able to extract knowledge from people who are basically the experts and enabling that to be shared with others, I think it's kind of it's needed. B, it's also kind of a noteworthy, noble cause.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room. I mean, I'm talking about my experience learning in a small shop, a repair fabrication, but, you could also, I talk in the book about, people who are in more production and learning in production type welding. We talked about like the training that they go through or not. I mean, some places they do, some they don't. So I think it would be interesting to look at learning in those places and maybe how people transition among different tasks in bigger production facilities. And even, I think there's this idea too that production is, the same thing over and over again from the time you start to the time you retire. But one of the things I found in writing the book was that it does vary. There is variation in production work. The tasks change, the components that they're working on change. They might move to a different place in the site. So I think there's a lot to be done on learning in different sorts of contexts too.
Awesome. Anything to add, Gareth?
You also mentioned that you'll be working on a piece for the Welder magazine too.
Oh, yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Yeah. So I just got, I'm working on getting what's called IRB, Institutional Review Board, permission from my university to do like online research, going to forums like that one Blue Collar Women that I was talking about, to ask them about hair coverings, what they do, like maybe the challenges they have with their hoods and also any sort of hair coverings. I'm doing this in conjunction with an undergraduate student at Iowa State who is in the College of Design. Her name's Bolu, and she also works at Howe's part-time. So that's where I met her. And, she was doing this research. She was having me like try on these hair coverings that she was making as part of her class for the design. And then I told her, like, I think we should try to pitch this. This is a kind of cool article. I've never seen any article on what people, especially women, but there's a lot of people have more hair. Mm-hmm. So, like how do people deal with this or the challenges that they have with welding hoods and how they fit? So we're going to ask women online and write that up. And we're going to use some of the pictures from Bolu's research so far. And hopefully we'll have an article for the Welder.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, are you familiar with Chicago Women in Trades?
Yeah. I saw that when I was writing the book. Yeah. There's other ones too.
Yeah, they're good folks. Yeah, around the nation, no matter.
Oh, you've had them in here?
Yeah, we had Desiree Guzman, who's an instructor with their welding program there. Because I know you had mentioned that you worked in Chicago.
Right. Yeah, that was a while back. But yeah, just recently, as I was doing the book, I read a little bit about that. I think there's one in Boston.
Yeah, it makes sense there would be similar.
That's a
groups.
great idea.
Well, I mean, once again, it goes back to like finding somebody you can connect with and go there for some. Yeah.
Mentoring and not being the only one. I mean, I think her name's Jean Schrodel wrote that book Alone in a Crowd back in 1985.
Wow.
And it's real. I mean, she's talked to like women machinists, women pipe fitters. I mean, all sorts of trades. And it's interesting to compare those stories with the ones women told me when they were responding to the article. It's like, oh, how much have things changed, you know? I think there's obviously been some progress. There's human resources offices. There's more places to go. There's more support. But yeah, I think women, do still face some real challenges. Yeah.
It's a human need. Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, thanks so much for
Thank you.
visiting
Thank you.
with us. The conversation was really delightful, and
pleasure.
yeah, continued success.
Thank you so much. I
Where can they
appreciate
find
it.
out more information about you?
Well, I mean, there's a site on the Iowa State English Department's page with my name and my research. There's the article in the conversation. If you find the website, the conversation, and then Google welding, I think I'm the only one that comes up, or probably not, but I'll be up there close because it's recent.
Yeah, it is a long headline. It's only 5.3% of welders in the U.S. are women. After years as a writing professor, I became one. Here's what I learned. That's the long headline.
We have our share of long.
Yeah.
headlines.
They got everything right in the heheadline there. Yeah.
Great. You also have a LinkedIn page. We covered that earlier.
Little used, but available.
Thanks for co-hosting today, Raphael.
Yeah.
Where can they find more information about you?
You can find me on the internet and the webs and the social media
And
and,
the social
everything.
medias.
So
And you know where people can send complaints, criticism, and ideas for the Fabricator Podcast? What email address?
You
No,
think of it.
it's podcast at fmamfg.org. Please, see, it only took me 100 episodes. Be sure and let your friends, family,
Enemies?
enemies, colleagues, strangers know about the podcast and reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you and goodbye.
The Fabricator Podcast is a production of Fabricators and Manufacturers Association, located in Elgin, Illinois. The show is hosted by Dan Davis and the staff of FMA Communications. The podcast is produced by Gareth Slager and recorded and edited by Griffin Hammond and Dana Weicker. Sales support provided by Andy Flando. Additional production support by Elizabeth Gavin, Mike Owens, Billy Culpa, Pat Simon, Brandon Geyer, and me, Sarah Spring. Email us at podcast@fmamfg.org. Thank you for listening.
God bless you for doing the Lord's work.